question, or maybe more of a comment. God is also a concept that has been invented by humans. There is no clear agreed upon definition of what that God is, what its characteristics are, because it's a purely speculated concept, and God can only be thought about, and it can't be actually observed, experienced, or measured. As far as we know, there is no such thing. I would say that we may have choices, but they aren't free. What we choose depends on many factors that we don't control. What we choose will depend on our genetic makeup, our environmental imprinting, our social conditioning, our immediate biochemistry, and the circumstances surrounding us. None of these are under our control, so our choice is not free, it is determined and conditioned. Okay, so there are actually two aspects here, God and free will, but they are of course connected. So God is also a concept that has been invented by humans. Well, I totally agree. Most of the gods, or in fact you could say all of the gods promoted by world religions, are concepts invented by humans. I've talked about this actually in several videos. However, the idea that because there are these false gods that have been invented by humans, that proves there is no God, that idea is also a concept invented by humans. In other words, most religions are based on a view of God that is a concept invented by humans. But atheism, scientific materialism, is also based on a concept of God that was invented by humans. Namely, that if God isn't like the Old Testament God, for example, then there is no God. There is, I don't know if you've ever realized this, but atheism is actually anti-theism. And theism is a particular view of God like the Old Testament God, the angry and remote being in the sky. So it's very correct that human beings have created man-made concepts of God. But it's just, if you realize that most religions are based on a man-made concept of God, you must, in my view, be consistent and say, well, then the idea that there is no God and can't be any God, that could very well also be a concept invented by humans. And the person then says, as far as we know, there is no such thing. No, as far as you know, there's no such thing. But throughout the ages, many, many people have had mystical experiences where they went beyond concepts, beyond speculation, beyond mental images, beyond the mental images of these formal religions. And they had experiences of a reality outside their own minds. And this to me, and this is actually why I chose to comment on this, this is the central question that most people, religious people and atheists alike, are not asking. If you realize that the human mind can create concepts that are disconnected from reality, how do we then determine what is real and unreal? And as I say in several of my videos, including one called How the Mind Can Deceive Itself, the only way to know something real is to connect to something outside our own minds. And there is something outside our own minds. That is what mystics throughout the ages, millions of mystics and millions of people in today's age, have experienced. In other words, you can have, very correct as the person points out, concepts invented by humans, but you can have experiences that are beyond concepts, beyond any concept invented by humans. So it's not true that it's correct that there's no clear agreed upon definition of what God is and what its characteristics are. No. But when you have a mystical experience, you experience something that's beyond any concepts, and that's why you realize you can't define with words or ideas that we have in this world. You can't define what God is. God is beyond all of this. God is a purely speculated concept, and God can only be thought about, and it can't be actually observed, experienced, or measured. It's correct that God cannot be measured by anything in this world, but God can be experienced through a direct mystical experience. And think about it this way. If you haven't had that experience, how can you know whether it's real or not? I know what an atheist or a scientific materialist is going to do. He's going to say, aha, Kim, you just had experiences that were created in your own mind and you think they're real. But how do you know that your atheistic position isn't created in your own mind and therefore isn't real? You see, it's true, many concepts of God are speculated. But as I'm saying, the concept that there is no God is also speculation. Because you haven't experienced that there is no God. You can say, I haven't had an experience of God, but you haven't had an experience that proves empirically that there is no God, because you can't. You can't, as philosophers and logicians will tell you, you can't logically prove that something doesn't exist. You cannot prove logically that unicorns don't exist. You can say, we have looked everywhere on the earth and we haven't found a unicorn. But you can't say that there couldn't be another planet somewhere where there are unicorns. So, you see what I'm saying? If you're really logical about this, you can't speculatively prove that God doesn't exist. But if you have an experience that's beyond speculation, beyond concepts, then perhaps that is actually a valid experience, given the fact that many people have had it. It's just the challenge of this is you can't then have an experience of a God who is beyond concepts and then come back from that experience and say, oh, this proves that my concept, my religion is true. You can't do that. You can only keep reaching for the experience. Now, for the second question about free will, it's very true, and I've said this in several videos, that most people are not making free choices because our choices are conditioned by a lot of factors, including our upbringing. Very, very true. But does that mean we don't have the potential to free our minds from our genetic makeup, our social conditioning, and all of these things? Well, that's where materialists will say, no, we can't do this because our mind is only the product of our brain. And this is again where, if you're logical about this, right? Here we have a materialist who is saying, as essentially, specifically, there's a materialist called Francis Crick. He's no longer alive, but he was co-discoverer of DNA. He received a Nobel Prize. He says, you are nothing but a bunch of neurons. All that you are, all that you experience is just the neurons of your brain firing a certain way. Well, fine. Then you have just killed science. And you have just shown that you are not taking the consequences of what you believe. Because if I'm a bunch of neurons, if I am nothing more than a bunch of neurons, and if my spiritual worldview is just a result of how my brain and my neurons are firing, then logically it follows that your atheistic materialistic position is not the truth. It's just a result of how your neurons are firing. So you again see the logical flaw there. You claim that spiritual people or religious people are superstitious because their brains are just malfunctioning, basically. But you're an atheist and your brain is functioning perfectly. Your brain is showing you the truth. But no, If everything we experience is the result of our brains, our brain processes, then there is no truth. There is no reality. Science has no meaning all of a sudden, because science isn't more valid than religion. It's just a scientific person's mind, their neurons are firing a certain way. A religious person's mind's neurons are firing another way. But it's all neurons firing. There's no reality. There's no truth here. So all of a sudden, man's age-old quest to find some reality outside our own minds is just null and void by this statement. So that's why I'm saying you can take that position, of course, and then you're denying free will. Or you can do what many spiritual people do, say, yes, I acknowledge that my ability to make choices is limited by my psychology, but I can rise above it, and therefore I can have less and less reactionary patterns, and therefore my choices become more and more free. And I know many, many people who have demonstrated this in their own lives. I've certainly demonstrated it myself. I am much more free today than when I found the spiritual path 48 years ago. I'm able to make much freer choices and choosing, for example, not to react to situations. And I believe it's been a worthwhile quest for me. So we have the ability to make choices. This is again inconsistency, as I've talked about before. You have these prominent atheists who are saying, they're giving a lecture, and they are saying, I'm hoping that during this lecture I can convince you that free will is an illusion. Well, okay, you are saying I don't have free will. Right now I'm believing that I have free will, but you think you can convince me that I don't. What faculty would allow me to be convinced by your argument that I don't have free will? Wouldn't I have to make a choice to accept your argument? And if I can make a choice to accept your argument over my belief that I have free will, doesn't that show that I have free will? Hello? So it's again this, as I said, as I've said many times in my videos, the real question here is, do we acknowledge that there's a reality that isn't created by the human mind? If we don't acknowledge this, then everything is created by the human mind. We're lost. There's no reality, there's no science, there's no spirituality, no point in anything. But if we do acknowledge that there's a reality that isn't a concept created in our minds, then we have to find out, how do we connect to that reality? How do we experience it? And the central challenge is, as I've explained in several videos, is we have to be willing to go into a neutral state of mind so we can step outside of our normal opinions and concepts. Because otherwise we will do what both religious people and atheists are seeking to do: validate their concept, the man-made concept, the concept that has been invented by humans. And what you see in the world going on today is, you see all of these conflicts because there are groups of people that are so intent on validating their man-made concepts that they're ready to kill other people in order to validate it. And the only realistic hope for a more peaceful world is that more and more people begin to be willing to look beyond the man-made concepts and connect to some reality that's beyond the human mind.